Alam mo ba, ang daming nagkakaroon ng hypertension ngayon? Alam mo ba yung hypertension?
Hala, hindi ko alam eh. Hindi ko alam eh.
So, what's up mga Vanguards? Alam mo ba, ang daming nagkakaroon ng hypertension? Alam mo ba ang hypertension?
Hindi ko masyadong kabisado eh. Ting! Alam ko na. Magtanong na lang tayo sa mga expert. Ready ka na ba?
Oo naman, ready na kami!
Tara!
If you lined up all the blood vessels in your body, they'd be 95,000 kilometers long. And every day, they carry the equivalent of over 7,500 liters of blood, though that's actually the same 4 or 5 liters recycled over and over, delivering oxygen and precious nutrients like glucose and amino acids to the body's tissues. All that blood exerts a force on the muscular walls of the blood vessels. That force is called blood pressure, and it rises and falls with the phases of the heartbeat. It's highest during systole, when the heart contracts to force blood through the arteries. This is your systolic blood pressure. When the heart is at rest between beats, blood pressure falls to its lowest value, the diastolic pressure. A typical healthy individual produces a systolic pressure between 90 and 120 millimeters of mercury, and diastolic pressure between 60 and 80. Taken together, a normal reading is a bit less than 120/80. The blood traverses the landscape of the body through the pipes of the circulatory system. In any plumbing system, several things can increase the force on the walls of the pipes: the properties of the fluid, extra fluid, or narrower pipes. So if the blood thickens, a higher pressure is needed to push it, so the heart will pump harder. A high salt diet will lead to a similar result. The salt promotes water retention, and the extra fluid increases the blood volume and blood pressure. And stress, like the fight or flight response, releases hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine that constrict key vessels, increasing the resistance to flow and raising the pressure upstream. Blood vessels can usually handle these fluctuations easily. Elastic fibers embedded in their walls make them resilient. But if your blood pressure regularly rises above about 140/90, what we call hypertension, and stays there, it can cause serious problems. That's because the extra strain on the arterial wall can produce small tears. When the injured tissue swells up, substances that respond to the inflammation, like white blood cells, collect around the tears. Fat and cholesterol floating in the blood latch on too, eventually building up to form a plaque that stiffens and thickens the inner arterial wall. This condition is called atherosclerosis, and it can have dangerous consequences. If the plaque ruptures, a blood clot forms on top of the tear, clogging the already narrowed pipe. If the clot is big enough, it can completely block the flow of oxygen and nutrients to cells downstream. In vessels that feed the heart, that will cause a heart attack when oxygen-deprived cardiac muscle cells start to die. If the clot cuts off blood flow to the brain, it causes a stroke. Dangerously clogged blood vessels can be widened by a procedure called an angioplasty. There, doctors thread a wire through the vessel to the obstructed site, and then pass a deflated balloon catheter over the wire. When the balloon is inflated, it forces the passageway open again. Sometimes a rigid tube called a stent is placed in the vessel to help hold it open, letting the blood flow freely to replenish the oxygen-starved cells downstream. Staying flexible under pressure is a tough job for arteries. The fluid they pump is composed of substances that can get sticky and clog them. And your typical healthy heart beats about 70 times a minute, and at least 2.5 billion times during an average lifetime. That may sound like an insurmountable amount of pressure, but don't worry, your arteries are well suited for the challenge.
hypertension is one of the leading cause of death, not only here in the Philippines but worldwide. And usually when we say hypertension, it's a condition wherein there is an elevation in the blood pressure, preferably if the systolic is greater than 140 and the diastolic is greater than 90.
Hypertension, ito yung pagtaas ng BP o alpha pressure more than 120 over 80. Marami kasing dahilan kung bakit tumataas ang alta pressure ng isang tao. Isa, kunyari may sakit siya, tulad ng kunyari sa kidney. Kapag may sakit ka kasi sa kidney, mostly tumataas rin yung BP mo. Kapag may diabetes ka, tumataas, dahil sa komplikasyon, tumataas rin yung BP mo. Pangatlo, siguro pag kunyari, if yung patient is in pain, tumataas rin yung mga BP.
Okay, that is in connection with the hypertension. And before we touch on, that is with the increase of the pressure of the blood within the body. As the term says, per se, hyperpataas po. So the thing is, we will have to know the demarcation and what is the hypo. If we're talking about the hypo, it's out. So if I may say, we have some categories. Hanggat maaari, we'll have 120 over 8. That's the normal size these days, the latest. 120, 80, 120, 70. But then, if you go up to 130 over 70, 80, that is pre-hypertensive.
What are the risk factors of hypertension?
Now when we say risk factors, usually the elderlies, those whose age is greater than 45 years old, are usually at higher risk of hypertension. Not to mention, if the patient has underlying medical conditions such as pheochromocytoma, that can also be one of the risk factors for hypertension as well.
How about the signs and symptoms of hypertension?
When you say signs and symptoms, that includes elevated blood pressure, there will also be headache, and sometimes the patient may also complain of chest pain.
Paano ba natin ma-manage ang hypertension?
Now, when we say management, however, hypertension is easily managed nowadays. We just have to adhere to the treatment plan, and that includes adhering to a healthy lifestyle such as eating the right kind of food, and then having exercise, moderate exercise per day. That can be very helpful and beneficial in lowering down the blood pressure, and at the same time, taking regularly the antihypertensive medications.
Health teaching natin para sa hypertension is that iwasan nila ang maalat, matataba. At of course, kumain sila ng mga high fiber foods, high fiber diet. And of course, kailangan nila ng exercise for at least 30 minutes a day.
Dahil ngayong sagana na tayo sa kaalaman sa hypertension, tandaan natin na ang pangangatawan ay ating pangangalagaan at huwag itong pababayaan.